On.
Hi everyone, I am here with some more true stories for you, and we'll try to do two on this one. The first one's Bible verse is Philippians 4:13, and that's one of the verses we're practicing to memorize, remember? So what is it? I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And this story is called AT-6 warplane, or AT-6 warplane, something like that, I don't know. Alright, this is a long one too. Years ago, Todd's neighbor had rebuilt a World War II fighter plane, a two-seater with the cockpit in the front and the seat behind for the trainer pilot. The plane, an AT-6, was built with a canopy top in 1944. The man, an accomplished commercial pilot with more than 25 years of experience, gave rides to neighbors and friends who attended an afternoon party to celebrate the completion of the plane. Todd was the fourth guest to fly, and the last. Todd had never been an avid flyer, but this was the opportunity of a lifetime to fly in a vintage World War II airplane. He had vertigo that day, so he was more concerned about not vomiting. The thought of crashing never crossed his mind. He and the pilot took off and immediately flew across the Yadkin River before zipping back over the county where they both lived. They planned to buzz the hangar and then lift back into the air, much like pilots of the old-time aircrafts do at air shows. On this run, however, the engine sputtered. The propeller stopped spinning. Todd could only hear the air whooshing past. At first, he didn't realize what was happening. At 1,000 feet, all conversation stopped. The plane rolled, and Todd grabbed the frame. His first thought was, "Here it goes, I'm going to be sick." Right then, the pilot leveled off the plane. Despite his modern headset, he didn't say a word. Time stood still. The next thing Todd remembers is seeing treetops and feeling erratic jolts. The pilot headed for a nearby clearing, but didn't make it. The plane started to roll, but the pilot was able to level it off again as they started into the trees. During the rapid descent, Todd thought, "I'm going to unhook this seatbelt so that when we go down, I can get out quicker." Then he realized that unhooking the seatbelt might launch him out of the plane and into the place he'd rather not be. As the plane hit the trees, the right wing clipped a limb and broke off. Fire roared through the cockpit. The plane smashed into the ground, belly first, but right side up. After releasing his 5-point buckle, Todd climbed out of the burning plane. A veteran firefighter, he knew he had only a moment to save the pilot, whose cockpit was now engulfed in flames. But the intensity of the fire forced Todd to give up his effort. Not able to save the pilot, Todd stumbled away from the plane, most of his upper body covered with burns. He soon would discover the worst damage was to his lungs. Fortunately, the plane had landed in a familiar setting, a wooded area he knew from his hunting days. He sat down and waited for rescue personnel to arrive. He knew the accident had happened close enough to the hangar that people would have seen the crash. Still, it took about 15 minutes for help to arrive. That ain't long, but then I'm sure it seemed like a lifetime. The first person on the scene, another neighbor, found Todd sitting on a log with part of his parachute strap on. Todd's adrenaline had kept the pain at bay, but he knew his burns were extensive. As chief of the local fire department, His greatest fear was being burned. He also worried about his guys. Every time the department responded to a call, he prayed that none of them would get burned in the line of duty. The first responders, many of them friends from the fire department and rescue teams, didn't recognize Todd at first. One of the firemen brought his pickup to the crash site, which was about a mile from the main road. Todd walked over to the truck and pulled himself onto the tailgate, where 3 guys joined him. He could hear the rescue chopper overhead, but wasn't sure he wanted to fly again so soon. The lead paramedic on the scene, a friend of Todd's, didn't recognize him until he spoke. The medic jerked up his head and took a second look at Todd. "Buddy, I didn't know that was you. I'm sorry." Surprised because the way he looked from being burned. With an intubation kit in his hand, the medic asked if he should start the procedure on Todd, who said, "Go ahead, do whatever you need to keep me alive." The medic was unsure if starting a rapid sequence intubation was the right thing to do, because he didn't know if Todd had inhalation burns. With any burn victim, possible burns in the throat and lungs are a concern. People who have inhaled smoke fumes often don't recover. The lungs are too delicate to handle fire. To intubate Todd, the medics quickly sedated him. At the same time, 2 other men started an IV in each foot because his arms were badly burned. Todd vaguely remembers the helicopter ride to the trauma center. It's making me sick, thinking about them putting IVs in his feet. Ugh. They've stuck them everywhere on me, but they've never done that yet. Thank God. When he arrived at the emergency room, his arms were so swollen he was losing circulation in his extremities. That's not good. The medical staff had to perform an emergency fasciotomy. I think it's where they cut you, so that it can release. A procedure in which the doctor makes a surgical incision to release pressure on the swelling extremity. They leave the incision open and apply sterile dressings to keep infection away. When the procedure was completed, Todd was transported to the tank room. What's that? The tank room. Is that the oxygen chamber thing? Todd doesn't have much recollection of the tank room either. He'd probably better off not remembering. The tank room of a burn unit is where patients are showered. Oh yeah. I didn't know it was called that, but I've seen this and I've heard them scream. Hope nobody gets burnt like that needs to go through this, or that you ever get burnt, because it's excruciatingly painful. I don't know why they don't put people to sleep before they do it. The tank room of a burn unit is where patients are showered and washed with soap to remove the trauma particles, dirt, grease, sand, etc. from their burns, and the scraping begins of the 3rd-degree eschar, charred dead skin. 40% of Todd's body was covered with 2nd or 3rd-degree burns. He endured 17 surgeries and spent a total of 83 days in the hospital. Todd is alive today because of a miracle. A Christian since childhood, he admitted he had peace about the ordeal, even as he walked, so to speak, through the fire. He craved food but couldn't eat because of the burns in his mouth, yet he never entertained thoughts of death. He has admitted many times since the accident that Philippians 4:13 kept him going and made him realize he could do this with God's help. Todd frequently said, "He'll get me through it." I took care of Todd while he was in the burn unit. He endured horrible pain. His dressings had to be changed twice a day. He also endured physical therapy, baths, fitting for braces, occupational therapy, and more. Rarely have I seen someone so miserable, and every time he thought his pain might subside enough to sleep for a minute. Someone else would come in to perform an ordered procedure. He never stopped hurting. I wanted so badly to ask how he was feeling inside, but because of all his suffering, such a question seemed ridiculous. I felt terrible every time I changed his dressings, and with burns over 40% of his body, it took about 45 minutes each time. Ugh. He wore his misery in every expression, every movement. I looked at his face and wanted to say, let's just not do this. But I knew that would ultimately cause more problems. The support from his family and community was impressive. His wife was strong throughout the ordeal. Her faith never wavered, and she spent a great deal of time at the hospital to support and encourage Todd. His parents were at the hospital a lot too. Family and neighbors cared for Todd's sons by taking food to their home and to the hospital. Todd's wall in the burn unit was covered with cards, pictures, posters, and signs of love from all his supporters. I don't believe I've ever seen a community come together the way this one did for Todd and his family. Still, my heart ached for the suffering he endured. I wondered when he would ever leave the burn unit. My travel assignment ended before Todd's release, so I didn't know what happened to him and his family until years later. Today, Todd is doing well. Many of us agree his recovery is a true miracle. We often hear stories of miracles taking place overseas during revivals or mission trips. We often hear reports of people being raised from the dead, throwing off their crutches and walking for the first time in their lives, and other miraculous events. My miracle came one cold, dark winter morning as I sped down the right lane of I-26 in North Carolina. I'm not a morning person, so leaving for work at 5 o'clock was always difficult for me. I got into my ice-cold car, placed my coffee cup in the holder, and set my cinnamon raisin bagel on the seat beside me. Within minutes, I was cruising down the highway at 60 miles per hour. As I thought about the possibilities of the day ahead of me, I realized no other vehicles were on the interstate. I slowed my speed slightly and reached for the radio dial, thinking maybe there was something I should know. As I returned my eyes to the road, I saw rows of bright red brake lights in my lane. I slowed a bit more, trying to adjust my eyes. Wishing I had put on my glasses so I could see better, I planned my strategy to pass if necessary. Within seconds, I realized an 18-wheeler had stopped in my lane. I immediately pressed my brakes and turned my wheel to pass, but my efforts were futile. The front wheels of my car began to skid. I knew nothing of any bad weather. I hadn't watched or heard the weather, so the ice caught me by surprise. I took the appropriate maneuvers, letting off the gas and turning the car wheels in the opposite direction to keep from wrecking. As I worked to get the car under control, I now understood the reason for the lack of traffic: bad weather. Then I realized I was headed directly toward the back end of a tractor trailer. That's not good. Thoughts of my family flashed through my mind. I gripped the steering wheel with a little tighter grip. Well, this is it, I thought, as I submitted to impending death. I closed my eyes tight and braced myself. And what else? Wouldn't want to see it either. There was nothing I could do but give in to whatever was going to happen. A few years earlier, a younger cousin had instantly died when she slid into the front end of an 18-wheeler while traveling in a sudden snowstorm. She was only 19. I thought for a moment I was to meet the same fate. After what seemed like an eternity, I thought I must be dead. I opened my eyes. To my amazement, I was still in my car, hands on the wheel, traveling down that steep mountain in the left-hand lane at 55 miles per hour and no truck in sight. Trying to clear my thoughts, I wondered if I were dead and didn't have a grasp on it yet. Questions flooded my mind. Is this what it's like to be dead? I'm stuck in time, doing what I was doing before I died? 10 minutes later, I pulled into the hospital's parking deck and proceeded to my unit. On the way in, I told myself, okay, I have to be alive. Work is real. I wanted to scream, I'm alive, while I jumped up and down. I still wasn't sure how it could be true. The only explanation was God's intervention, a miracle. God had transported me through natural space from the lane of sure death to the adjacent lane, the lane of the living. My transport through space and time happened more than 13 years ago, and every time I tell people about it, they stare in disbelief. People never believe you, no matter what you say, unless they see it themselves. I've learned that, so I don't even tell stuff anymore. The natural mind cannot comprehend the amazing things of God. Job 37:5. At the moment we need Him, He is there. God promises to encamp His holy angels around us. He does this for our guidance and protection. He has given His angels the task of ministering to His people. These servants are here to help us when we cannot help ourselves. I don't know what kind of angel protected me that morning, for by natural law the 18-wheelers should have decapitated me. But God delivered me from sure death, and He'll do the same for you no matter what circumstances you face. That morning the Lord spared me because my work for Him wasn't finished. Others who have experienced a miracle similar to mine or have come back from the dead all say the same thing. We read in Psalm 145:20, "The Lord preserves all those who love Him." Of course, the Bible is full of miracles. The lists vary based on how the list maker defines miracle. Regardless of the definition, God has a purpose for each one. In Bible times, one reason for a miracle was to prove that the person performing it sent by God. Another reason was to create faith in those who saw it. I love the way Martin Luther King Jr. described faith when he said, "Faith is taking the first step when you don't see the whole staircase." When God leads us, we may not feel like it's the right thing, that we are not cut out for it. But when we follow Him up the staircase of our lives, one step at a time, He takes us where He wants us. As we begin our climb, we won't see the end results as our thigh burn. But if we stay obedient and faithful, we can keep going and one day see the purpose of all the hard work and suffering. An entire book could be devoted to the miracles, some of which are better known than others. Jesus turning the water into wine, the healing of a woman with the issue of blood, Jesus feeding the 5,000, the casting out of demons, and let's not forget raising a widow's son from the dead at Nain, or healing the leper. Although the miracles experienced by Todd and me may never gain the fame of the numerous biblical miracles, they have had a tremendous impact on each of our lives. I'm sure it's safe to say our families are grateful we survived. And neither of us intends to stop talking about the great things God has done. Amen. Hey, Sherman, what time is it?
19.
You think I got time for another one?
I don't know.
It's a short one.
I don't know.
I'm going to try to read you guys a short one here called The Tunnel. Bible verse, 1 John 1:5. And this is the message of promise, which we have heard from Him and now are reporting to you. God is light, and there is no darkness in Him at all. No, not in any way. All right. 8-year-old Sandra was excited to be going home to Winston-Salem from Mount Airy with her sister for the weekend. Her sister was 12 years older, and Sandra loved spending time with her. She loved the freedom of summer and the fun times they had together. They decided to go to the community pool. Neither knew how to swim, but her sister loved lying by the pool while Sandra played in the shallow water. "Sandra, don't go into the deep water," her sister said, as she turned to lie on a lounge chair. Gaynell settled into the chair and looked up. Sandra was gone. Sandra had run to the ledge of the pool, to the 9-foot deep end. She climbed the metal steps, ran the length of the board, and jumped. She went down deep into the water. She scrambled to get back to the top. Her head barely broke the water line. She slipped back down into the water, splashing and hoping to get Gaynell's attention. With no lifeguards on duty to save her, Sandra struggled to get back to the surface. She broke the surface again, but only for a second. Her lungs aching, she scrambled back to the top again, but quickly slipped back under into a dark tunnel. She was going down a dark tunnel. She continued along the path toward beams of intense bright light. A large group of children waited at the end of the tunnel. They smiled and held out their hands, hoping they could help her. Sandra reached out and almost touched one of the children's hands when she felt the horrible pain of something pressing into her chest wall. She looked up and saw people dressed in emergency uniforms standing over her. She heard her sister crying. "She's going to be okay," said a man in a uniform leaning over her. Water poured from Sandra's throat and nose as she choked and coughed. The chlorine smelled and hurt. She wanted to throw up. She felt herself being lifted onto a stretcher. A bag was placed over her mouth and nose as she rushed to the back of the ambulance. She could hear more people crying and orders for people to get out of the way being shouted. Sandra only wanted to close her eyes and never wake up. 24 hours later, Sandra was released from the hospital, but the experience still haunts her and her sister to this day. Sandra will enter a swimming pool or ocean, but she'll only go in till the water reaches her waist. Her sister, however, has never been back to a swimming pool since. Aren't you thankful we have a redeeming God? Sometimes we all need a second chance, maybe 3 or 4 chances. This makes us grateful for our Lord's mercy and grace. No matter how difficult things are, we can find hope in Jesus. He promises that when we call, He will answer. We all have endured our own personal hell at some point in our life. For some, that may have been the loss of a loved one. For others, it might have been a bad marriage. The suffering we experience in these darkest moments of our lives pale in comparison to spending eternity with God. We should remember our affliction lasts only but a moment in the vast scope of time. When the circumstances of life have us down, we just need to call upon His name. And it shall be that whoever shall call upon the name of the Lord, invoking, adoring, and worshiping the Lord Christ, shall be saved. Acts 2:21. God is always there for us. Call on Him. It's never too late. It's never too late. Good night, guys.